Hi there, and thank you for tuning in. Viltrox kindly sent me this lens for review, and it's the APS-C 33mm 1.4 for the Nikon Z mount. And I'm really happy to see that now competitors are moving in on the Nikon Z mount. It has been Nikon very much alone producing lenses for that mount type. But now we see the Viltrox is here, and they have 3 lenses, and I suggest you check them out. They have this one obviously, and then they have a 23mm and also one a bit longer. So you can find that on their homepage, and I will post a link to that in the description below. 33mm on APS-C is almost equal to 50mm on a full frame. So this is a nifty 50 lens, a prime lens obviously, and you will notice also that it comes with autofocus. And here in April 2022, the price is around $270 US dollars, that is, on Viltrox's homepage, but there may be taxes that apply if you buy directly from their homepage. In the box you will find, other than the lens itself, a little pouch, a little user guide, and a warranty card that you can sign up for your warranty, and that's actually it. I was happy to see that the box was sealed from the factory, and this gives me a good feeling that I'm the first one to use this lens, and it is as it was when it left the factory. So really a nice little detail. It's not all lens producers who do that. The lens itself here is very solid. It feels heavy. It's 270 grams, and I mean that heavy in a good way. It's a lot of metal here. You can see the mount here is metal. The lens hood even is metal. The only thing that I'm absolutely sure is plastic is the lens cap, but that's, I guess, okay. The focus ring here is really, really nice. It's big, it's easy to find, and it's just dampened just the right way. Sometimes a little bit too much, sometimes a little bit too little. This, in my mind, is really the way it should be. A really pleasure to use, especially with focus points or peaking highlights on the Z50. Really a pleasure to use this manual focus ring. The other thing this lens has, it's a very simple lens, as you can see. It only has 2 rings here, but the other ring is the aperture ring. And the aperture ring is a little bit different from what I'm used to, because it doesn't have any clicks. So it takes a little bit of getting used to that. You can't really feel when you move from one stop to the next. But I guess videographers will love this. I'm not so sure that photographers will love it, but you can then just put it in auto mode, and then you can control the aperture from the camera body as you're used to. The lens comes with 9 aperture blades, slightly rounded, so I would expect it to perform well when it comes to bokeh and not so well when it comes to sunstars. But we will see about that a bit later. It takes filter threads of 52mm, as you can see here, and it focuses internally, so there are no issues with moving parts. So filters should be really easy to use, and it's relatively fast at 1.4. If you ask me, that is fast. So this is what the lens looks like mounted on my Nikon Z50, and I think it looks nice, but of course we are into personal preference territory. There's no special things you need to do to use the lens. You just mount it just like you would with a Nikon lens. I'm only too aware that MTF charts are not very sexy to look at, but you can really learn a lot from a lens by looking at them. And you can see here the light blue here at f8 is well stopped down, whereas the black here is f1.4, meaning fully open. And if we look at the contrast first, you can see it's very, very impressive. Basically flat and high is good. So you can see this is very close to 1, and it's all the way from the center to the corner of the lens. Really, really impressive here, contrast. The sharpness is also good, and that goes both for center sharpness and corner sharpness. If we then open it up, rather than having it stop down to f8, you can see then the performance is a little bit different, not so impressive, but still good. You can see here the contrast remains very good, but there is some decline here towards the corners, as you would see on most lenses, and also the sharpness here. Obviously that is okay in the center, but when you get to the corners here, then it looks not so impressive. But I would say if you keep the lens stopped down and avoid shooting wide open, then you will get some very impressive performance here, whereas you need to be a little bit more careful with the corners. So if you're a demanding architecture photographer, you may want to consider not using this lens wide open. If we go into Lightroom and compare two images, you can see here I'm at the center of the image here, so the little white box here shows you, and you can see here that the branch here and here is very similar, and this is f1.4, meaning fully open to the left and stop down 5.6 to the right. Don't be fooled by the shallow depth of field that makes the yellow flowers here seem out of focus, but the branch here in the background, you can see it's very similar sharpness and contrast, I would say, for these two images here in the center of the frame. Contrast that to here, we've gone to the corner of the frame, as you can see in the white box here, and now the fully open here to the left is not so sharp as it is to the right at 5.6, and you can clearly see that it appears to be more soft or more blurred. We are in the corners now, and this confirms what the MTF charts also told us, that fully open, the lens is a bit soft towards the corners. The autofocus on this lens reminds me very much of what I find on some of my Fuji lenses. It's fast, it's silent. You may be able to hear a little bit sound if you're a very demanding videographer with a microphone close to your camera, but for most of us this will be more than enough. And I will say that the fact that you get this good autofocus in a lens at $280 is amazing value for money. One of the things I really don't like to see in a lens is chromatic aberration, and it's because I shoot into high contrast situations very, very often. I like to shoot into the sun, and as you can see here in the text from the book to the right, wide open, there is some strong coloring going on, which is a clear sign that there is chromatic aberrations here. To the left, stop down, the issue is gone. So I would say that the lens controls chromatic aberrations pretty well stop down, but not so well fully open. And you can also see here my party trick to shoot a piece of folded tinfoil also shows that there are some strong colors that shouldn't be there. Not so good marks for the lens ability to control chromatic aberrations. I like to get really close to my subject, and hence the minimum focus distance to me is vital. The specs say that the Viltrox lens will focus around 40 centimeters as the closest, but I was able to squeeze a few more centimeters out of it. But it is still a focus distance that requires you to crop a lot if you want to, say, photograph a small shell. So I would wish this lens could focus a bit closer to the subject. My first test of the flare with an iPhone showed that it controls flare pretty well if you try to follow the green dot. However, going outside shooting a street light, I noticed a strong halo around the light itself. If you are a videographer, you may like this effect, but I think that most photographers would prefer a better control of the flare. I don't think I've ever had a client say to me, "Hey, Frederick, the bokeh in the image is a bit nervous, and we can see both onion rings and cat eyes in the corners." I really think you have to be a photographer to notice these things. And I also think we're into personal preference territory, but I do find the lens does a good job, and I hope the images I'm showing you here illustrate that. Not so much when we are talking sunstars, but with rounded blades you get round bokeh balls also stop down, whereas the sunstars will be not as sharp as a lens with straight blades. It cannot be any different, and you simply cannot have both. In my reviews, I normally don't comment on color rendition because it is subject to personal preference and what you're used to. I will say that I think this lens does a great job and that I really like the colors it produces. I hope the images here give some credibility to my assessment. As you have probably guessed from watching this video, I'm not a great videographer, but I think that videographers should take a closer look at this lens for several reasons. The manual focus grip is excellent, the aperture ring is clickless, the lens has minimal focus breathing, and the flare control gives some creative options. So for these reasons I would put this lens on my shortlist if I was a videographer in the 50mm market. If you have been watching the video this far, you are indeed very patient, and you may be left with the impression that I'm negatively biased towards this lens. That is not the case at all. The big picture is that you get excellent value for money in a well-built lens. However, no lens is perfect, and this one is neither. Whether you can live with the cons is entirely up to you and your personal preferences. I struggle a bit with the chromatic aberrations and the minimal focus distance, but your style of shooting may deem these points irrelevant. If you want a 35 or an 85mm full frame equivalent, head over to the Viltrox homepage as I mentioned in the beginning. As always, thank you for watching, stay safe, bye bye.